Hello to everyone. I'm very happy to do this lecture. Thank you very much for the invitation. First, I would like to bring up to mind the rising demands and expectations addressed towards arts institutions today. It's a bit crazy because museums should open themselves up to new audiences, be custodians of a rich heritage, create identity, perform educational and socio-political tasks, offer great tourist attractions, provide a platform for the local art scene, work within global networks, radiate internationally, generate ideal and material value, and cause only low costs. It's certainly very difficult to meet this wealth of demands and expectations. Actually, it seems to be impossible. Nevertheless, I think this is the point of departure for many art institutions today. I'd like to give you an insight into my institutional and curatorial work of the past years in order to discuss central questions of art institutions today. I like to share my thoughts, which I hope can be useful for you. Let's talk about architecture first. Generally speaking, architecture organizes the relationship between interior and exterior space, the relationship of inside and outside, between people, artworks, and surroundings. It's never a neutral background to the objects exhibited, but rather organizes the gaze of the viewer. It predefines how we look at art and its surroundings. It shapes reading and interpretation of what we see and how we feel, how open we are or not for encounters with art and other people. In short, architecture is a powerful tool of and for communication. Against the background of growing expectations, demands, and fast changes in art and society, spaces can no longer be designed with a single definite function in view. Rather, they should imply the possibility of being constantly reinterpreted and redefined, be it artists, curators, mediators, together with audience groups. I think today's architecture should actively join the debate of artists, curators, and visitors of what we find important and how we relate to artworks and the world around. I will show you two examples. First, the building of Kunsthaus Graz, where I have been director since July 2016, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Leipzig, where I was director from 2001 till 2011. Here comes Kunsthaus Graz. It is one of, meanwhile, many iconic buildings and stands in a row with other iconic museum buildings since the 1990s. Actually, with Bilbao, a town with almost Graz, it was one of the first ones. Built by Peter Cook and Colin Fournier to London-based architects on occasion of Graz European Capital of Culture 2003. The aim was to create a strong visual sign that would be able to positively radiate to the world and certainly raise attention to Graz. And it has done till today. Even if sometimes people do not know Graz, but they know the building, as it happened to me in Seoul some years ago. You can see the building here. And you can also see that the Kunsthaus Graz is situated in an older part of town. It's a less privileged district of the city, adjacent to the historic city center. It was built on a vacant lot, directly adjoining the Iron House. You can see that, well, not very well, on the left, but you will see it later. This Eiserne Haus, the Iron House, was once a modern mid-19th century department store, and in 2000 the building was gutted and linked to the Kunsthaus. They were connected. Its listed facade and its cast iron structure on the upper story were preserved. Oh, here you can see the Iron House, and you can see its cast iron structure, and also the blue shimmering bubble on the right of the new building, floating above the glazed ground floor like an air bubble. Its soft forms fuse organically with the older buildings on the adjacent lots. What's so great with an icon beyond its marketability? Well, I would say, and that's the great thing, it connects with its visitors easily and moves their emotions. Because multiple attributions are possible, and through this openness of meaning, a much larger public can relate to the building. It's not just for insiders. So you don't have to have much knowledge about architecture to appreciate the building. And I think museums building should definitely connect with their location and the people. The Kunsthaus does so with its blobby shape, which people simply find cute. With its open ground floor, it connects with the world outside and invites people to come in. Altogether, the Kunsthaus has 4 entrances, so it can be entered from all sides. Its foyer holds a conference space, a shop, and a cafe. It's conceived as a multidisciplinary venue for exhibitions, artistic projects of all kinds, and performing arts from the beginning. So the Kunsthaus Graz provides a complex palette of spatial features and functions. I will come back to the ground floor and how it operates later. Here you see the inside of the building, the foyer, with an installation by artist Hegyu Yang. And this was exactly before we started the process of reorganizing the ground floor in 2016. I'm showing it here because you can see the connection to the outside very well. The Kunsthaus also connects with town through the so-called Bix Facade, which is a media facade by Berlin-based designers, architects, Realities United. Originally, the skin of the building, so the architects Cook and Foyer have always spoken of a skin. So originally, the skin of the building was to be transparent, changing between opacity and transparency. But for technical reasons, at that time, this was impossible. Relative design of the Kunsthaus this central idea of a transparent communicative facade and brought it back by using light and media technology. Actually, the principle is very simple. The Bix light and media facade is equipped with 925 conventional fluorescent lamps, literally kitchen lamps, and can be controlled with a computer and a special software. Here you can see how simple the structure is. The conceptual starting point for Realities United was a technology already outdated at that time. This decision is based on the consideration that developments in the technical field are so rapid that any technology would quickly become obsolete. The primary reason to use an outdated technology was, however, It's not attractive for commercial use. Contrary to many artists who love to deal with limitations, companies do not. Here you can see the spatial organization, the spatial layout of the Kunsthaus. One glides into the building on a sliding belt, the so-called travelator. Peter Cook speaks about gliding up into the unknown, that visitors do not know what they will expect or can expect inside. This passage is often used by artists. Here you can see two examples. On the left side, Jun Yang, and on the right, Peter Kogler. These artists thought carefully of how visitors enter the exhibition space. Inside, the spatial concept is very much oriented towards concepts known from the late 1960s and 70s. Basically, the Kunsthaus follows a hybrid architectural concept. So 90s iconic architecture meets the late 1960s and early 1970s. Cook and Foyer have pursued the idea that the building would be appropriated over and over again. There shouldn't be too much predefinition. And that's why it's more appropriate to speak of platforms and not rooms. And that's very much keeping with 1970 thinking. You can find a similar approach at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers saw it similarly in many ways. There, too, it was all about platforms and flexibility. A forerunner for this thinking, a forerunner for Peter Cook and Colin Fournier, is the Bâtiment Public that they planned as members of Archicram in Monte Carlo in the 1970s. They were thinking of a popular cultural center with theater, art exhibitions, classical concerts, and even a circus and a go-kart track, all in one place in a permanently changing space. I mean, that's a fantastic idea, isn't it? However, the economic question immediately comes into play. The permanent rethinking and rebuilding is quite expensive and ultimately also not very ecological. I will come back to this issue later. Here you can see the spaces of the Kunsthaus Graz empty. The architects count from top to bottom. So space 1 is the top level. Space 2, and you can see that they are very different. Space 3 is our children's space. It's completely covered by a carpet, and children have really fun playing there and working. And this is the so-called needle, a viewing platform that's also used for art presentations time and again. As you could see, there are no white walls to hang something on. One has to think about what the walls look like, if it shall be a wall at all. It can also be a cantilever, as in the exhibition of Peter Kogler. So this is a cliché, and it was exhibited on occasion of Peter Kogler's exhibition Connected. It can also be metal panels hanging down from the ceiling, as in the Graz architecture exhibition in 2017. The first, the cantilever, paid tribute to Frederick Kissler's display for Peggy Guggenheim's famous gallery, The Art of this Century in New York in 1942. Our architects, Cook and Fournier, went for creating possibilities and scenarios. They rather defined points and zones, determined where we can tap electricity or not, where we can switch certain zones of lights on or off, where we can place more weight. Basically, it is a kind of very basic manual, a kind of instruction manual on how the building operates. Here come some installation shots that show the variety of uses. Most spectacular was the exhibition of artist Katharina Grosse in 2014, or this one by Peter Kogler and Franz Pommersl. Here you can see an audiovisual installation which transformed the entire space, one, into a visually fluid space. Right now, we are working on how the building and the display can be more economic, ecological, without getting too standardized. The past exhibitions we did were testing some possibilities of how it could be in terms of construction and material. We would like to come up with a basic, solid construction, a system of reusable elements, still open enough to be redefined time and again. To rethink our ecological approach does not only apply to the presentation of art. We also like to replace less environmental friendly materials with eco-friendly ones. Together with an Austrian-based company, we work on alternatives for wrapping in order to replace the bubble wrap. So this is just one example. And besides, we think of plantation on our roof terrace. Before talking about the program, ground floor, shop and cafe of Kunsthaus Graz, I like to introduce another building, a building I commissioned for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Leipzig in 2003. What's quite unique is that it is based on a design process which not at first, as is usually the case, arises from the appearance of the building or from the integration of the building to its urban environs. It rather arose from the curatorial practice, from the specific needs of the institution as we identified at that time. It was very decisive to define the project agenda together with the architects as if Berlin-Vienna. And this was the case from the beginning. To search a common language and transform the agenda step by step in direction of the architecture. Important was that the architects really have had a strong awareness of the needs of contemporary art. If time allows so, I would always recommend that long process together with the architects. It is also possible for bigger architecture projects, as the competition for the extension of blocks in Copenhagen shows. There it's a mixed-use building that hosts the Danish Architecture Center, offices, co-working spaces, bookstore, gym, cafe, restaurant, and apartments. What I found interesting is that in 2006, 5 architecture offices were invited just to talk about the possible brief first. At the very end of that process, Omer, an office based in Rotterdam, got it. The building in Leipzig, actually a pavilion, owes itself as much to inspirations from artistic practices as from the history of architecture. And here it even connects with Cook and Fournier's thoughts for the interior of Kunsthaus Graz. The architecture of both buildings resists concepts of a conclusively defined, unalterable architectural statement. And this means utilizing the building by continually changing and redefining it key to the architectural concept. This diagram shows the multiplicity of uses. The cinema can be used as a gallery space or a lecture room. The cafe and exhibition area can turn into project workshop spaces, and vice versa. Large sliding partitions, revolving doors, and curtains make it possible to connect or divide the spaces as required in order to create different spatial configurations, exhibition layouts, and correlations of meaning. The spatial structure is designed to be reversible, and here you can see some alternatives. In contrast to Kunsthaus Graz, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Leipzig has walls, and the architects have designed much more, the architects have defined much more. Not all the walls are movable, And even the ones that are cannot all be moved at the same time. Curators and artists are required to decide. To move the walls is technically impossible. What you can also not do is to seal off a room. The curtains can only be fitted in designated places, and some areas within the building cannot be darkened at all. Actually, there are no rooms, rather flowing zones with upper and lower slits. It's more a space continuum. This means that sometimes you can even see the feet of the visitors. There are also disruptions of visibility caused by sunlight and reflections. In the outer zones, where there are floor-to-ceiling windows, nature literally comes into the interior with light and shadows on the walls and floors. One could certainly look at this as being outrageous. However, the building does not seal off from the outside and from daily life. It relates not only the artworks to one another and to their surroundings, but also the visitors to one another. This is a building which does not fade into the background. It makes you aware of the architecture all the time and invites an argument. Walking through the pavilion is amazing. Wherever you are, unpredictable views and connections pop up. Most artists and curators love this building because it doesn't tell you you can do everything. You can't do everything, but much is possible. The Leipzig building was planned and constructed in a climate-friendly and ecological way. It relies on natural climate systems and materials. Various zones have also been defined in terms of climate technology, with a core zone that makes top climatic conditions, and it makes a great climate possible for certain loans. In both examples, architecture no longer serves as a building envelope, as pure presentation space. It has become itself an actor, a sparring partner in the creation of exhibitions. It seeks communication with curators, artists, and audiences. Back to Kunsthaus Graz. I started addressing expectations and demands directed towards art institutions today. Some create tensions that cannot be dissolved. E.g., to be a great tourist attraction and to make locals feel it is their museum, to show the works of international star artists and to provide a platform for the local art scene is extremely difficult. In response to that, most museums tend to come up with a mixed portfolio if the size of their building allows so. To go to all possible directions at the same time runs the risk to lose one's institutional DNA. Besides, and this can be seen in many cities nowadays, the majority of museums in town goes more or less into the same direction. This means same big names, same local exhibition, same marketing, really pushed by economic parameters. I spoke about architecture before. However, it depends a lot on what's going on inside. If an institution fully relies on the iconicity of its architecture, it is for sure perfect for its marketing, but it does not say anything about the connectivity of the institution to its audience. So it needs to be more. To me, key questions are, why is the exhibit here? And what does the exhibition or the program have to do with me? Museums should be able to answer these questions. At Kunsthaus Graz, we operate in the field of international, modern, and contemporary visual art with regular excursions into the performing arts. We begin with art of the 1960s. This is set programmatically because, on one hand, Graz was an important city of the avant-garde in the 60s, and on the other hand, against the background of the other institutions in town. Mainly the museums of the Universal Museum Joanneum, which covers other older segments. So we see ourselves within a bigger picture, and that allows us to be specific. In the program, we balance global and local regional agenda. We are looking for reasons and communicating them, why we do what we do, and what it has to do with the locality and the people who live in Graz and Styria. Yes, we do big international exhibitions and collaborate with institutional partners abroad. However, we only take an exhibition if we find a convincing connection to the local context. Next, I'm going to show you 3 examples. The first one is Congo Stars, an exhibition done in collaboration with the Royal Museum for Central Africa, Tervuren, in Belgium, Kunsthalle Tübingen, Germany, Iwalewa in Bayreuth, also Germany, and Picture in Lubumbashi, Congo. An exhibition about Congolese art, most popular painting, may seem completely out of any good argument to what I said before. Congo was a Belgian colony. This is what would come up in most people's mind first. However, when we started to look closer into the local context, we discovered more and more connections that were even surprising to our Belgian colleagues. The connections and interdependencies are multifaceted and extend far back. From educational programs in the 1960s to the decades of teaching by 2 Austrian professors at the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Kinshasa in the 70s and 80s. Important Congolese artists such as Thierry Samba and Chibumba Kanda Matalu already exhibited in Graz in the 90s. Very important collections of Congolese art outside Belgium can be found in Austria. And the leading artist in the Congo, Alfredo Liolo, studied art in Graz and in Vienna. Finally, one of the 5 curators of Congo Stars, a Congo-born writer, Fiston Wanza Mujila, lives and works in Graz. His famous book, Tram 83, was the blueprint for our exhibition. Here you can see a huge timeline that informs about Congolese history. On the back, we set up another one, a timeline that informs about the connections to Austria. However, the exhibition did not only link Congo and Austria with each other, but both with national narratives and transnational socio-political events. On occasion of Congo Stars, members of the local African community did walks in town, talking about Africa in Graz. We also commissioned them to do the opening and a week of events, which was really well perceived. And this helped us to reach a group that didn't feel attracted by the Kunsthaus before, but continues to come after. Another example. In 2019, we invited the Austrian Chinese artist Yang to do a solo. Yang's solo exhibition explored fundamental questions around artistic endeavor, asking what expectations do we have of artists, how do they present themselves, and how are they presented, how much can artists create by themselves, and to what extent it is a work created in exchange with others, what significance do an original, a unique piece, series, and reproductions have in public perception and on the art market. With this exhibition, Yang not only turned into cliches of the art business, but also into cultural cliches and stereotypes, as you can see very well here. Born in China, raised in Austria, and currently dividing his time between Taipei and Yokohama, Yang himself is very often confronted with attributions and definitions often connected with evaluations. What does it mean to be defined as Austrian, European, Chinese, or Japanese, or to define oneself? For us, his exhibition allowed us to address another quite big community in town, that of Taiwanese people. It was them who opened the first Chinese restaurants in Graz in the 1970s. A modified version of that exhibition will be shown in Taipei at Guangdong Museum, Dina Cheng Gallery, and MoCA at the end of this year, respective in the beginning of next year. And here comes the last example. The exhibition Arts and Crafts. Subtitle was Between Tradition, Discourse, and Technologies. The exhibition responded to a worldwide growing interest in crafts, craft methods, and production techniques. And that interested me against the local context. Styria, the province in which the Kunsthaus is located, is very proud of local craft traditions. They are part of the local identity, as it's the case in many other countries as well. However, and that's also mostly the case, the discourse is more or less territorial. With this exhibition, we wanted to open up the discourse and place it in a larger social context. So arts and crafts mediated between contemporary art, craftsmanship, and new technologies, traced cultural transfers across national borders, explored intermediate areas and transition zones. The importance and appreciation of the crafts as an essential component of material culture, cultural identity, and community was connected with social and economic conditions in a globalized world. Certainly, we do not only do big exhibitions, we use the intermediate periods between two exhibitions for our performance program. So this is an example we did in last year. The Bix Facade is still an important screen for media art projects, and it's frequently used by artists and curators, and very often connected to the program of the Kunsthaus, to the exhibition program of the Kunsthaus. In addition to this, we commission art projects for the social media and virtual project exhibitions, which can only be seen on the internet. The exhibitions are accompanied by a comprehensive mediation program, and most successful, very successful, is the so-called event week, a week in which local artists are invited to set up a particular program, the week in which local artists are invited to set up a participatory program for and with school kids and the general public. Big draw from 2015. Now let us briefly look into our areas to get an idea of the spatial layout. Here you can see the square meters and how many functions the Kunsthaus comprises of. Since the 1980s, museums run cafes, bookstores, all kinds of businesses. And some look at this as a kind of drawing in of consumerism and are, for right or wrong, very critical. But being allowed to run their own businesses has indeed increased the scope of the museum. so that they can now build up reserves, maintain shops and cafes, and develop them into a significant source of income. At the same time, the pressure on the museum has increased enormously because they also have to run their own businesses. And this means that most museums and other art institutions today are cross-financed. So it's partly government funds and income from admission fees, special exhibitions, museum shops and cafes, and loans, fees for the loans. I'm very much convinced there is no way out of dealing with increasing commercial demands. The foyer of the Kunsthaus, with its ATM, ticketing, ads, cafe, and shop, is also closely linked to questions of consumption and marketing. Here you can see an image of our cafe. People love a lot, and it's very often packed. Here is our shop, an image of the shop. Against the background of increasing commerce in museums, we have decided, metaphorically speaking, to take the bull by the horns. What does this mean? The artist group Superflex began in 2016 with the redesign of our ATM in the foyer of the Kunsthaus. The ATM was already given, so I couldn't do anything about that. Superflex turned the ATM in a completely chrome-plated machine and placed it in the center of the foyer. The Superflex ATM is a shining sculpture, it is a fetish, and a money withdrawal machine in equal measure. We commissioned the artist group to do a 5-year project dealing with economic conditions and commerce. Their 5-year plan, which pays tribute to Marxist models of economy, will be concluded with a solo exhibition in 2021. Here you can see another project they did together with Jens Honning. It's number of visitors. They did it in 2005, and we reinstalled it at Kunsthaus Graz in 2019. And what you can see here, it's clear what it does. It invites speculation about visitors' numbers. It aptly illustrates the conditions and criteria most cultural institutions have to meet for success today. The more visitors they attract, the better their chances are for funding and acceptance. Superflex intervention formed the starting point for a series of other artistic and curatorial interventions that have worked on the orientation system, infographics, shop, furniture, lights, barrier tapes, and floor mats. In short, on basically all functional areas of the building, all service areas. You can find artworks everywhere in the building, spread out the entire building, and in between the commercial areas. Superflex, Doppeldeck 1, Annalena von Heldorf, Hertha and Hannes Briesch, and Oliver Klimpel were invited to the relationship between non-commercial areas, but they were also invited to look at and reflect on the functional areas and functions of the institution. This means that on the one hand, the artists and designers contributed concretely to the furnishing of the building. On the other hand, they also dealt with the routines, standards, and necessities of the institution. And that was most important to me. They entered into visual communication with the visitors about all this, also about why a museum has to have an ATM machine. One of my favorite objects in the foyer is the so-called cat tree for the art. It is a sculpture and a display object for smaller exhibitions to be staged in the entrance area. A vertical space inhabited by works of art. And here come two images of barrier tapes by Herter and Hannes Briesch. And this shows that even banal things like barrier tapes are worth to be considered. Concluding, some basic facts about Kunsthaus Graz. The Kunsthaus is associated with the Universal Museum Joanneum, a limited liability company. Until this year, we were one of 10 museums within a so-called matrix structure. 10 departments and 4 service departments, each with its own management, were combined under the roof of the Universal Museum. The Kunsthaus has 52 employees on its payroll. Since this summer, we have turned into an affiliated company supported by the city of Graz and the province Styria. We still share the service departments, the visitors and museum services, finances, marketing with the Universal Museum. Until last year, the Kunsthaus did not have a collection of its own, but it regularly presented artworks from the Universal Museum's departments in its international exhibitions. I hope that my lecture could give you some insight into my curatorial and institutional work, and I hope that some of my thoughts will be useful for the Taipei Fine Arts Museum and its future plans. Thanks a lot for listening.
What are the challenges or limitations in hosting art within a skin glass structure without columns and walls? And did the museum have to turn down or select artworks?
Well, certainly it is a challenge. When I came here, a lot of people told me that they think it's impossible to do any exhibition in that building. But I totally disagree. It just requires different approaches to the building, to the architecture, and the space. Certainly, the biggest challenge is and do specific exhibitions. It can be highly expensive. And in the early years of the Kunsthaus, the budgets were much higher. So what we have done when I came in 2016, we have worked on a basic structure, a kind of meta or superstructure, horizontal and vertical rods, and all kinds of surfaces and materials can be integrated into this system. Yeah, so it really requires a different thinking compared to wide cube settings. And the difference Leipzig is, because I showed you 2 buildings. And in Leipzig, this is a newer one. The presentation structure is already built in. So there are hidden walls behind the visible walls. So you can move walls, set up curtains, and you will have a totally different situation. And that's very simple and effective. So, okay, to come back, it's more challenging to deal with the Kunsthaus building because there is basically almost nothing, just some hanging points on the ceiling and on the floor. And this requires a system which compares predefined elements, but only a few, and non-defined elements and non-defined parts. And if you ask why do we do that, I mean it's quite exciting for the audience, because I mean people always discover, they can always discover something new, and the quality of experience increases. Because the exhibitions are not interchangeable, they are, as I said, specific, and that drives people to come back.
当然这有很大的挑战，像我刚开始接任馆长的时候，很多人都说这根本在这里布展是不可能的任务，但我的看法有点不一样，我觉得只要换一个思维方式，重新对这个馆舍还有空间去做发想就可以了。当然最大的挑战就是这会造成布展的成本上升。早期格拉兹美术馆的预算其实还蛮够的。那在我在2016年接任馆长之后，我们有做一些基本的架构，甚至可以称为超级架构，就是有做一些管，垂直的管和水平的管。那这样子不论什么样的平面都可以接到我们这个系统里面，所以我觉得这只是要跟本来白盒子的美术馆换一种思维方式去布展就可以了。那我举的另外一个例子是莱比锡的当代美术馆，那个美术馆就更新，它的架构它里面是有墙的，在明墙后面有一些隐藏的墙体可以移动，也可以加设门帘，所以它的空间是可以不断的变化，这样运用起来也蛮有效率的。相较之下，格拉兹美术馆的挑战就比较大，因为里面几乎是空的，只有一些悬挂用的点，在天花板上和地板上面。但是我觉得我们只需要去好好结合这些已经界定好的元素，再加上一些未界定的元素，上加运用，我觉得就可以布出很好的展览。那为什么我们的馆体里面先不去做更多的界定呢？因为这对参观者来说是一个充满期待的体验，他们每次来都可以有新发现，这样的体验也是很好的一个观展体验，那所以他们就会一再的回来。
Have you ever refused an artwork or an artist? And of course, we think carefully of whom to invite. So the artists we invite, they like these kind of challenges. And curators and artists love this building because it is a challenge. It's quite stimulating to artists and curators. And, well, of course, there are maybe artists, it wouldn't make any sense to show their work here. But isn't this the case with every exhibition space? That not everything is appropriate to everyone? So we really try to link the architecture and the exhibitions. So they are not conceived independently from the architectural setting.
OK， 确实我们会在艺术家方面会做一些选择，我们选择的艺术家都是喜欢这样一个有挑战性的空间的，那确实蛮多的策展人和艺术家都非常喜欢在格拉兹美术馆做展览，因为他们觉得这是非常刺激的一个策展过程。那确实有一些艺术家他的作品也许不适合在我们的美术馆展出，那其实对于所有的展览场这都是一样的，有些艺术家的作品不适合这样的场地，那所以我觉得最重要的是建立建筑跟展览之间的连结。
One thing we show also works from the medieval age, for example. So it's not only a matter of contemporary art. I mean, I think this is important to add. So we have shown all kinds of artworks over the past centuries.
好，他想要强调的是，格拉兹美术馆不只展出当代艺术品，他们也有做过中世纪的艺术展品。Facing the commercial problems and local environment requirements, how did you think contemporary? Do you think an institute should respond to the contemporary needs?
Yeah, well, it's clear that the economic pressure is growing nowadays. The pressure on institutions. So one could say they must make money nowadays. And that's absolutely fine. I think it's great having a good restaurant or cafe. And also people like museum shops. But I think it's really important to think of the commercial sphere when doing a program of an institution. And that's why we invite artists such as Superflex to comment or intervene into economic structures. Because then they turn into a subject, and then they become a subject of debate. About the processes of economization in art institutions.
OK， 确实，现在艺术机构面临越来越大的经济压力，好像必须要盈利。那我觉得这本身没有什么问题，经营餐厅、咖啡厅，还有贩卖部，这些都很好。但是最重要的是要去反思这些商业的行为。所以我们有邀请 Superflex 这样的艺术团体进行干预，去思考，把它当作一场讨论，到底商业跟艺术机构之间的连结是什么？
Yeah, so the artist projects we had in the past year, it's not only in the building, it can also be around. For example, in 2000, we did the free shop. So we worked together with local shops in our neighborhood. It was also a project by Superflex. And just imagine that people, they entered the shop, they bought their items, and then they wanted to pay. And then at the front desk, at the cashier, they were told that they don't have to pay anything. So it's basically a reversal of monetary transactions. So this kind of projects we do as well. And what is the project all about? I mean, people were surprised, and why is it like this? And there were discussions about, I mean, you know, this relationship of goods and money, the exchange, and what you get for, and why do you have not to pay? So all this was extremely stimulating in terms of and rumor was growing around, but of course it happened only once or twice, and it couldn't be planned.
OK， 所以那去年其实我们也有做一些其他的尝试，就是做免费的商店，我们跟艺术馆周遭的一些商店还有 Superflex 合作，就是有一个计划。他们观众可能进去商店买东西，那这样掏钱出来的时候才发现原来不用付钱，这其实是一个反商业行为的模式。我们做这样的实验，大家都觉得哇很惊讶，为什么不用付钱？然后就会重新思考到底商品跟金钱还有这些货品交换之间要不要付钱，他们就要重新思考这些习以为常的商业行为，会激发他们的想象。那当然在格拉兹就把有这个流言流传出去，大家就觉得好像买东西不用付钱了，可是其实没有，我们只有做了1-2次这样的实验。
But what we also do, I mean, practically, is that we collaborate with the shop owner and the cafe owner and work out specific projects with them. Plus, and that's very pragmatic, we try to get very good conditions so that the artists and the art institution benefits from that. So this means simply the agreements with the shop owner and the cafe owner, that they are profitable for the arts.
好，另外我们也有跟商店啊、咖啡厅的老板合作，去专门设计一些计划，给他们提供很好的条件。当然，这也让艺术家还有艺术机构是受惠的，就是我们会跟这些商店的老板去看怎么可以让他们展出艺术品的同时，他们也可以获利。During the promotion process of the Star architecture, is there any voice against this building project by locals or others in the ancient city? I think it meant are there opposition when the Kunsthaus glass was proposed?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Sir Peter Cook, one of the architects, he has, in the beginning, 90% were against the building and 10% liked it. And today it's exactly the other way around. So 90% like it and 10% do not. And I would say it's actually 99% like it. It has become part of the town's DNA.
当然，一开始的时候，像我们建筑师就提到了，刚刚提出来的时候，当地居民有90%都反对这个建筑，就1%觉得不错。但现在这个比例就反过来了，我觉得甚至是有9%的当地居民都很喜欢这座建筑物，它已经成为格拉兹这个城市的 DNA。
Yeah, and the good thing is that it is alien to the ancient structure of the town, but nevertheless it approaches the old town and the famous roofscape of Graz. It's the way how it's, it slips into the city's roofscape and connects with this visually.
在这个古城里面，它看起来像个外星人一样哦。可是其实它也蛮特别的，就是在这些古城的屋顶当中，你看到它像一个大的水滴一样，它刚好就钻到刚好现在旁边的屋顶中间，就是完美的跟旁边的建筑融合在一起了。
Yeah, and of course there's an enormous contrast in terms of material. It's acrylic panels, and this is alone, the color, the material is a strong contrast to the surrounding. And I think this is why the nickname has come in, friendly alien. So it's friendly, but still alien.
确实，它跟周遭环境形成很大的对比，像材质，它的材质是亚克力的，然后颜色也跟旁边的建筑不一样。那所以大家都很亲切的叫它是友好的外星人，就虽然是对我们很友好啦，它毕竟是外星人。